Welcome to Nova Network November, a partnership between Villanova's Alumni Relations and Career Management teams. I'm Meredith Oakenquist, the Director of Career Management for Villanova University. Our department provides career and professional development services and support to all university alumni, graduate students, so students pursuing a master's and PhD academic programs, and we also provide support to all of our adult learners in the College of Professional Studies. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to welcome you to the Nova Network presentation of Level Up Your Career with International Collaborations. So today's topic includes and covers the topic of international collaborations. We're going to learn how to level up a career by pursuing and strengthening collaborations abroad, and to present this essential skill for professionals at all stages is our very own Dr. Gray Kidd. Gray is the Assistant Director of Graduate Research Programs here at Villanova in our Center for Research and Fellowships. He assists Villanovans with finding and leveraging international research and immersion programs. Dr. Kidd has extensive experience with global humanities, has led research teams exploring critical initiatives, and has had several collaborative international research endeavors. For today's presentation, we welcome questions from the audience regarding the presentation content. Dr. Kidd will leave time at the end of our time together to respond to questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen for your questions. And now, with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gray Kidd.
Thank you, Meredith, and good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to three of our fabulous panelists who I'll interview shortly: Meredith Oakenquist in the Villanova Career Center's Career Management team, as well as the Office of University Advancement. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce all three of our panelists who are joining us today. First, we have Aida Mohajeri, who is a PhD student in Educational Studies at the University of British Columbia and a research consultant for Special Olympics International. She's a former U.S. Department of State Cultural Affairs Specialist and U.S. Fulbright Research Fellow in the United Arab Emirates, thanks to a Villanova University Center for Research and Fellowships. She earned a bachelor's degree in political science and Arab and Islamic studies from Villanova University in 2016, and a master's in international education policy from Harvard Graduate School of Education. Her international intersectional research brings a critical perspective to the role of education in societies. Thank you for joining us, Aida. Next, we have Katherine Parr. Katherine is an entrepreneur, advisor, and philanthropist. She is the founder of two small ethical luxury businesses with international supply chains and reach. Founder and owner of Katherine Parr Jewelry and co-founder of Parre Chocolat. She helps lead the Gary W. Parr Family Foundation, where she works on foundation initiatives with a focus on education and economic empowerment. She is in Fulbright Specialist Program. Her background spans the broad gamut between private and public sector work. She has worked for years in the international fashion industry in a variety of roles for clients and designers in New York and European markets, following graduation from Villanova University's School of Business. A U.S. government certified teacher, Katherine was dubbed by CNN World News as the model teacher. Her background includes leading a fashion career to spend over 5 years in a Title I district as a teacher and social entrepreneur. Her jewelry and artworks have been exhibited at Clarence House in London for His Majesty King Charles III, the Embassy of Afghanistan in Washington, D.C., as well as various galleries and events in the United States and Europe, owned by Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan and others. Katherine continues as an advisor for charities and supporting causes in the education and economic empowerment space, including Education for Employment, Middle East, North Africa, Custom Collaborative in Harlem, and Turquoise Mountain NGO, UK, Afghanistan, and Jordan. She has represented UNICEF in its programs for global citizenship and an education focus. Her TEDx talk, The Road to Economic Empowerment is Conscious Consumerism, is featured on TED.com and has received international recognition. Thank you, Katherine. Last but not least, we have Patrick Smith. Patrick is a primary care nurse and public health researcher whose work focuses on understanding and addressing structural determinants of health inequities. He is a past recipient of a U.S. Fulbright student grant in Lesotho and has conducted global health equity research with a variety of international organizations, including Partners in Health and UNICEF. In addition, he has served as a complex care manager at Fenway Health, a federally qualified health center in Boston, Massachusetts. He received his BSN from the Fitzpatrick College of Nursing and is currently pursuing his PhD in community health and prevention at Drexel University, where his dissertation research examines the intersection between housing instability and cardiovascular health. Now, the first part of today's discussion will help you better get acquainted with the three remarkable Villanovans that are joining us today by inviting them to speak about their backgrounds and trajectories. We will then hear their recommendations for seeking out international opportunities and being an effective collaborator. The first question that I have is for Katherine. Katherine, after graduating from the Villanova School of Business, or VSB, you embarked on a successful career in the international fashion industry. You later left the space to pursue teaching in a Title I school district for over 5 years. What catalyzed this shift? How does this experience inform your work as a global entrepreneur and philanthropist?
Thank you, Gray. That's a very nice question. My fashion career was always a dream of mine. I graduated in 2001 from Villanova. I was able to mobilize my business education on an international platform by working, starting out as a fashion model. I had opportunities. It was always a dream, so I took advantage of that. It was a great experience, and I learned all about every aspect of the global business of fashion, living and working abroad and in New York. It was fascinating, sort of outside of the box experience that put me in a visible position with exposure and a network of influential executives in fashion and all industries. As creative as it is, it's pretty cutthroat and superficial. So after years of that work, I decided to make a serious life change and accepted a government fellowship to teach in a Title I district in New Jersey. I was teaching during the day and studying at night for my certification. It's basically the New Jersey version of Teach for America, called Alternate Route Fellowship. And I learned a tremendous amount about the education, different socioeconomic groups, immigration, and government systems in place for children and families. And all of that I hadn't known. So it was very educational. As a global entrepreneur and philanthropist, I've mobilized the education for both chapters of this nonlinear career, the book smarts, the street smarts, and the global exposure to have an impact on the global community at large through business. Between working solely with fair trade suppliers for my jewelry business and chocolate business in developing nations, to analyzing metrics to evaluate charities for donations, every experience has helped me grow and become more prepared to tackle any work in the future. So it all builds upon everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Patrick, on the topic of transitions, I know you were a primary care nurse by training. How and why did you decide to shift your focus from clinical work to public health research?
Thanks so much. Great to be with you, and thanks for that thoughtful question. So I have kind of a back and forth professional trajectory. Since my time leaving Villanova, I've held, as Gray kindly summarized, roles in clinical spheres and in global health research, and now I'm pursuing PhD research on intersections of housing instability and health in the U.S. And I've kind of taken this winding path to where I am now as a product of a lot of different influences that I had at Villanova. I felt really privileged to be a nursing student at Villanova, where I think I had a really great foundational training that covered a lot of different clinical environments and exposed me to some really interesting patient scenarios. And at the same time, over the time that I was at Villanova, I had opportunities to take courses in global health and development that challenged my ways of thinking about where I wanted to have impact and where I could see myself having impact. So over the course of my time at Villanova, I sort of began to increasingly see myself as potentially operating beyond the bedside and kind of working to address social and structural determinants of health, which led me to pursue some global experiences in Ghana following my junior year, and subsequently in Lesotho with a Fulbright grant. And it was those, I think, initial experiences working abroad, where I was able to partner with local organizations and carry out their research priorities and really learn from those experiences of working on the ground to advance their work, where I gained greater exposure to the magnitude of health inequities and the complexity of addressing some of these structural determinants of health inequities globally. And that's been, deeply motivating, and I think is something that continues to drive me today, is just the knowledge that there are a lot of really challenging problems that can only be addressed through partnerships and collaborations between people with complementary skill sets. So Villanova provided the initial entry point for me to gain a lot of those insights. And then I think experiences since then have sustained and furthered that interest.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, if we turn to our second graduate student, Aida, when did you know that you first wanted to pursue a career in international education policy?
Sure, thank you so much, Grace. So good to be with you all today. So my career in international education policy came from my professional and personal background and passions. So I was born in Iran and I immigrated to the United States, and I, had that initial experience and personal background with the Middle East. And within Villanova, I was a political science major, but I also worked heavily with Special Olympics, and I was a teacher's assistant for students with disabilities as well. So I really wanted a way to combine these two together. I worked in linguistics, I did a lot of political advocacy, and I couldn't really find a way to combine the two passions. And thankfully, the Center for Research and Fellowships and Katherine was a huge motivator and a huge resource for me to be able to do that. So the Fulbright was kind of my entryway into doing this to the United Arab Emirates, where I was able to combine education, policy, research in the Middle East context. And from then on, as Patrick has said, I, kept sustaining that interest and that passion through the different roles that I've had. And although it's been a weaving road, that's been the core foundation of what started this progress.
Thank you, Aida. And just an observation for the first three remarks that have been shared is that people's trajectories are not linear by any sense of people's futures and the careers that they are forging. So if we jump back to Patrick, as a newly minted RN in 2016, what initially drew you to conduct research in Lesotho?
It's a great question. And the answer is multifaceted. So I would say part of me was interested in working with a select few international organizations who I really felt at the time embodied the ideal of what I thought global health system strengthening could look like. And I wanted to learn more from their model of care delivery and their model of partnering with local ministries of health to advance the quality and access to health services in these settings. So the organization I wanted to work with most was Partners in Health, and an area where I felt that their work was most inspiring was Lesotho. So that was one side of it. I think another side is epidemiologically, Lesotho has really pressing health challenges. At the time when I applied for my Fulbright there, the life expectancy was 49 years. About 1 in 4 adults in Lesotho is living with HIV. It has the second highest incidence of tuberculosis in the world, with a really significant problem with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which is challenging to treat in a setting with huge geographic barriers to care. It's mountainous in Lesotho, it snows in the winter, and there are high rates of poverty that mean that accessing routine and advanced care for conditions like HIV and tuberculosis and even diabetes and hypertension can be really challenging. And so as I was thinking about how I wanted my career to unfold and what sorts of problems I wanted to address, I felt really sincerely that I wanted to learn from the work that was happening there. And then I would say, from the time that I got there, the thing that sustained my interest in that was a lot of relationships. My initial interest was largely epidemiologic and kind of driven by the cool work that this organization was doing, also by the knowledge that not a lot of people wanted to apply for Fulbrights in LSU2. So I felt like it was an advantageous environment to kind of apply to. But then, once I got there, I think the foundation of why I stayed for an additional year following my Fulbright, and why I retained connections with a lot of my colleagues from that time is just that I felt very openly embraced by a lot of the community members who I met and worked with, and felt like that was a critical period for my own personal and professional growth. So just learned, more and more every day about myself and the ways that I wanted to have impact in the world. And I think Fulbright provided a great open-ended opportunity for me to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. Katherine, throughout your career, you've worked with a variety of organizations, including those in the public and private sector. How are they alike and how are they different?
Thank you, Gray. First of all, thanks again for including me. I'm so impressed by my co-panelists and their stories and learning about them. I have worked in public and private sectors. So as I mentioned before, the fashion industry, private sector, public education, public sector, private and public. So they're alike and they're different. They're alike in that they both have missions, goals, and are evaluated on their performance metrics of people and organizations. But unlike people around the world who actually are more alike than different, I find the public and private sector to be very different. The private sector basically has a bottom line of financial profitability. There's branding, there's product, there's so many, or services, and so many factors involved, but the bottom line is a financial profitability. The public sector is more sort of ESG, environmental, social, or governmental oriented, with sort of a goal of accomplishing something for basically humanity. It could be the environment or government, but generally with what I've done, it's been social. So really, it's because of those differences that I've created the two small businesses, the jewelry and the chocolate, that have the same business model. It's an ethical, sort of a hybrid, an ethical business model, if you will, so that sort of both fiscal and social responsibility are really important. And we balance them together and try to accomplish both earning financial profitability and then also making a difference by providing fair trade jobs and clean environmental supply chains. And so it's hard to do both, but it's really that much more rewarding because it's something that's different and is not always common. So thank you.
Thank you. Aida, if we turn back to you, during your final year at Villanova, what initially drew you to conduct research in the United Arab Emirates under the support of the Fulbright U.S. student program? Did your in-country experiences and connections open new doors for you?
Sure, thank you. So what initially drew me is I spoke a little bit about my experience with Special Olympics at Villanova. Well, there was actually a lot of press happening for Special Olympics World Games Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates in 2019. So knowing that, I looked into why Special Olympics was happening in the UAE and the Middle East and what kind of shifts were happening in terms of attitudinal barriers and inclusion for people with disabilities. And I could see that there was a federal law implemented, Federal Law 29/2006, that was the first of its kind in the Middle East for the inclusion of persons with disabilities, and that the UAE was really at the forefront of placing policies and practices for inclusion in the region. So these were, this stems the idea of going to the United Arab Emirates. I visited Dubai during my time at Villanova as well, just for a short period of time to understand better what Fulbright could look like. And in turn, I started creating connections with the help of KERF, of course, and networking with people to see where my skills could be valuable and where I could learn a lot from the UAE, its practitioners and policymakers. As Patrick also mentioned, I stayed after Fulbright. I actually stayed for 5 years in the UAE, and I had the same experience of being openly embraced, and that also means openly embracing differences and cultures. And this was also a critical period for me in, as I mentioned, the first time going back to the Middle East and being able to combine those two passions together. And yes, absolutely, Gray has created new opportunities. So a lot of the international work that I've done ever since was because I got to work with so many incredible people and connections. UAE, there are 92 different nationalities in the UAE that live amongst each other. So that means being able to create a lot of different networks all around the world. And it has, I'm grateful there was a lot of travel opportunities with the roles that I had. And in doing so, I was able to meet people in their own homes and in their own contexts, and to learn from those experiences as well. So it has definitely been a fruitful experience that has opened up future international opportunities as well.
Thank you, Aida. And Patrick, if we dig a little bit into your Fulbright experience as well, and beyond, how did your experiences as a Fulbrighter in Lesotho and later in Ghana shape your understanding of public health challenges in this country and globally?
Yeah, it's such a great question and a big question to answer. So I'll try to keep my answer relatively brief. But I think that there's a lot, broadly speaking, that you can draw from global experiences. I now work predominantly in addressing US-based health inequities and social determinants of health in the US, but find that I frequently reflect on what policies look like across different contexts, because it's really valuable to see how different countries structure their societies, how different governments operate, and what kind of levers of advocacy exist and have been effective in other settings for advancing similar aims here. By way of example, I would say my Fulbright project in Lesotho focused predominantly on understanding how the village health worker program worked in rural areas to connect people to improved access to HIV and tuberculosis care. I traveled to 25 different remote health centers over the course of my Fulbright and interviewed patients and nurses and community health workers, members of the Ministry of Health, and grew increasingly familiar with the way that health system was structured, enough to see that there were tremendous barriers to delivering effective care in those settings that ranged from geography to interruptions in supply chain to socioeconomic barriers to care and financial barriers to care for patients. But in no setting where I was in Lesotho was it the reality that patients did not have a guaranteed right to access primary care, because it's enshrined in the Constitution that is a right for citizens in Lesotho. And the reality is that that's not the case in the United States. So what I take from that is that there are tremendous barriers to achieving health inequity in any society. But a lot of those, I think, are perceived as fixed when we operate in a space in like the US where a lot of these problems are kind of like deeply rooted in history. We can presume that it's really difficult or impossible to imagine a society where we would guarantee universal access to primary care. But I worked in a setting with far fewer resources where they had made that laudable commitment to ensuring access to primary care for all, and still a lot of challenges in kind of achieving that and achieving the high quality of care that everyone there wants to provide. But from a value perspective, I think, I view that as an inspiring example and something that, that challenges me and others to kind of keep driving at addressing some of these barriers to equity in the US. Just the notion that, that aspirations of more equitable societies exist all over the world, and that there are different strategies to achieving those there and in the US.
Thank you. Katherine, you've mentioned that education and economic empowerment are twin pillars of your business and charitable ventures. Can you tell us a bit more about how this overarching mission took shape?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I grew up in a family of public educators. My father was a teacher and superintendent, and my mother was a kindergarten teacher. My brother's currently a teacher, and there's sort of no way out for me to not have that experience that I did at working in a Title I district in New Jersey after fashion work. So the value had always been there. And then having the experience and seeing the good and bad of and ugly of the the systems and issues that face families and children from, I mean, all across the board, the issues that people face are not limited to certain socioeconomic groups. However, the financial constraint of someone living in a Title I district is greater than, is more pressure on and more fire under the pot, so to speak. So just seeing that, understanding that people need jobs is another economic empowerment value and pillar that I have both in my businesses and also in our philanthropy work with the family foundation that I have with my husband. So I try to focus, which is not always easy. You've heard my background. It's a little bit diverse, non-linear career is what I call it, but every experience builds upon the prior and brings you towards the future. So focusing on these two pillars really helps me focus both philanthropy and business and understand what the goals are, because you really can't accomplish everything and do everything well. I think one of the things I've learned over time is to really focus on certain specific goals, and then you can accomplish more in that focus rather than trying to spread too thin and be all over the place. So I wouldn't claim to be an expert in the environmental issues that face the planet, but I have focused more on social issues and specifically with education and economic empowerment. That's how I sort of filter everything, and it makes for more effective work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Aida, if we turn back to you, kind of thinking from a 40 to 50,000 foot view, how has working with people in organizations in the US, UAE, Canada, and Ireland shaped your understanding of education access and opportunity?
Sure. So this is also a fantastic and big question, and I'm happy to have conversations with anyone afterwards as well. But I think a big way that it has affected my understanding is you read literature, you read policy, you sit in a comfortable home, and you hopefully, and you understand through reading experiences or hearing about experiences what's happening. But then it's different when you're actually in the country and speaking to people who may not have access to education or different opportunities. So to actually see those attitudinal, physical, and social barriers enacted and to maybe face those as well is a different experience and something that's grounding. And it's to be able to see and understand the different issues that work together to not allow for this education access, including war, climate change, the different barriers in our society that are happening and working hand in hand, is something that has shaped my understanding for sure. And on the other hand, I talked about, sitting down and reading these policies or sitting down and reading this literature, but understanding how that policy is being borrowed from one country to the next and how it's being implemented in the countries themselves. These global contexts, being able to travel and being able to see has brought those policies to life and has brought to light how practitioners are actually implementing or not implementing these policies. So that's been really important in shaping my understanding as well.
Thank you, Aida. Now, if we take a slight pivot and think about the formative experiences that have prepared you for success, those specific to Villanova, let's start with Patrick. Nursing and public health are inherently collaborative and even relational fields. How has your Villanova nursing education prepared you to form partnerships with patients, communities, and public health officials?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of trial and error. So you get an experience as a nursing student to be in a lot of different contexts, as I mentioned, through different clinical rotations within and outside the hospital. At Villanova, I also had the privilege of working on a number of different advocacy campaigns with Catholic Relief Services and Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. And I would say that my engagement in kind of the broader network of experiences at Villanova that I had within and outside the nursing school really set the stage for me to be able to speak to people with different lived experience and understand kind of where they were coming from. I think necessarily the cadence of conversations, the kind of what you discuss, how you discuss it varies depending on the role that you're in. And so as a nurse, my conversations with patients look very different than my conversations with interview participants or colleagues in Lesotho. But you gain the ability over time to kind of I think have a lot of humility and understanding that people come from really different circumstances. And a thing that I really leaned on early in my experience in Lesotho was just having that humility and kind of willingness to admit a lot of things that I didn't know about someone's background as a kind of like baseline for my interaction with them, and then to ask how I could be helpful. And my approach to forming partnerships in my global health equity work was and continues to be like showing up and asking people in local organizations how I can be of service to them, and understanding that at the outset I might not know exactly how that partnership would look. And I think that that's a skill that I initially developed when I was doing a lot of advocacy work at Villanova, and kind of honed further through those experiences. Just being surprised by how partnerships can unfold in nonlinear directions, and then being willing to accept your partners kind of wherever they come from.
Thank you, Patrick. Katherine, I have a variation on this question for you. How did your time at Villanova prepare you for your numerous responsibilities and endeavors, knowing that your background is the Villanova School of Business?
Yes. Well, Villanova really, I chose a business school business degree for practical purposes. Coming from a family of public educators, I was a little bit sheltered, and I knew certain careers, mostly in education, and that was it. So business in my mind was business. It was a totally different space that I knew nothing about. So I really chose the business school because I wanted a practical launchpad and preparation for myself to have a career, and to be prepared for any industry that career would face. So, for example, I think Villanova Business School provided me with a toolkit for success. That's what I sort of say. It's like a briefcase full of tools. So it provided me with accounting, finance, marketing, very practical, useful skills for many jobs. And that's what I really wanted to do to guarantee that I went to college to get a job and to be prepared for the future. So a lot of my friends were in the business school and didn't choose to stick it out. It's not really the most fun school, but it can be. Accounting for me was not as creative as I wanted to be, but it was very useful. I use accounting in all aspects of my life. I learned Excel. I use it every day. Jewelry business sounds glamorous, but it's a lot of number crunching and really minutia on retail math and supply chain, everything. So it's been a very useful, practical choice, and it was deliberate for me. So I knew it could prepare me for anything by arming me with the business and analytic skills that are critical to success in a variety of industries, both private and public sectors. Villanova gave me a structure and a way to live life, to get many, many book smarts, and have new experiences as sort of a transition period to the real world, which I think was really important. So I'm grateful for that, and I've applied what I've learned in many different spaces. Thank you.
Thanks. Aida, if we turn back to you, how has studying political science and Arab and Islamic studies at Villanova prepared you for your roles in teaching and education policy, mixed methods research, and community advocacy?
Yeah, Villanova was certainly helpful, and I'm really grateful for my experience at Villanova. My courses, of course, laid the basic foundations of the knowledge that I needed to enter some of these contexts in terms of literature. But also my time at Villanova helped me to engage effectively and to consider global perspectives, and always do it with compassion and humility of not knowing and being okay with not knowing, and being okay with answering asking big questions that may not have simple technical solutions and that have complex solutions that require, again, partnerships has been a big theme, partnerships to solve. So in that way, some of my courses in intergroup relations, IGR, were really helpful for me. Having Dr. Bialka, just conversations with Mr. Gaynor, Steve Koch, Dr. Aida, Dr. Mohajeri, Katherine from the Center for Research and Fellowships, all of these individuals, all of these community members who supported me and supported my development were extremely helpful. So not even just coursework, but definitely beyond that, the conversations and the community learning was essential to developing for the future.
Thank you. The next spate of questions is really intended to pick our panelists' brains about the question of collaboration. And we can start with Katherine. As you see it, what makes someone an effective collaborator and a responsible global citizen in today's world?
Well, it's one of my favorite questions. I think having an open mind is really critical to being accepted and accepting of different cultures, lifestyles, socioeconomic demographics, and business practices. Being willing to challenge the perspective with which you were raised in order to become a more worldly, sophisticated person who can integrate with all walks of life to accomplish both personal and organizational goals. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in suburban New Jersey at the beach. Lovely place, very sheltered. I went to Villanova and enjoyed that, but I really hadn't had a lot of diverse experiences and exposures until I graduated and went into the workforce in New York in 2001. So I think I had to be open and really willing to learn and to accept what I didn't know, which was a lot more than I realized. So being humble, I think humility is a big theme in what my co-panelists have been saying, and I think I'll third that. Really understanding that the world is so big and being open-minded is super. Secondly, I think you have to be able to challenge yourself to try new things with new people, new experiences, and as I have said, and it's worth repeating, every experience builds upon our past and prepares us to be more effective and impactful in the future. And then lastly, you asked about how to be a responsible global citizen in today's world. It's hard, but the first 2 points I made are true, having an open mind and challenging yourself, but also you want to consider people and the planet in all that you do. The choices today that we make affect people's lives. The choices I make in jewelry or chocolate business affect people along the supply chain, from a woman on Park Avenue buying jewelry to a farmer in Guatemala, cacao farmer that doesn't have shoes and chops off cacao with a machete, or the workers in Afghanistan, the women I worked with for 5 years before the Taliban took over. So I think thinking about that and choices you make are important, and being humble, compassionate, and also, I think, to inspire everyone. We have a group of very intelligent, smart, capable people on the group, on the audience. So to understand that the more relevant leadership positions that you are able to access or earn for yourself, the greater the positive impact we can have on our local and global community. So it pays to sort of get ahead and be more impactful, make a greater difference, and have the impact that is part of the Villanova value structure.
Patrick, same question for you. What do you think makes someone an effective collaborator and a responsible global citizen?
Yeah, so I'd start off by just reflecting positively on things that Katherine and Aida have said, and just say that I totally agree about the importance of intentional consumption and walking into spaces with a sense of humility, and exposing yourself to unfamiliar environments and trying to learn and grow from them. I think for me, a central theme has been exposing myself to different circumstances than the ones in which I was raised, and trying to walk in again with a sense of humility, and an attitude of wanting to learn as much as I can while I'm there, not necessarily to try to jump in and solve a problem that I have a preconceived kind of picture of, but rather to walk into spaces with the knowledge that everywhere I go, there are people who probably know more than me about the issues that they're going through. And that's a central theme that I think I've woven into my work in Lesotho, doing a lot of qualitative research, asking people about their experience of implementing policies and their experience of accessing care in these different environments. It's also a thing that I weave into my current work, talking about implementation of local eviction prevention policies and the the impacts that they have on people and the barriers to achieving the highest possible efficacy of those services. So I think for me, adopting that stance of unknowing and having humility when walking into spaces is really important. And then the flip side of that, I think, is that, like, for me, I've had to listen when people tell me something that they know, and then apply that to the work that I do. So if I put myself in spaces where I'm learning, and I am able to enrich myself by doing so, the flip side of that is that I think I then have a responsibility to act upon that knowledge, and to be kind of unambiguous about how I do that, applying my voice to advocacy for greater social justice. And I think having equity at the front of your mind when you're kind of like learning about things you don't experience is really important for me in terms of framing follow-up actions. So yeah, I would say walking into spaces with a sense of humility, walking out of them with a sense of conviction and willingness to support others' efforts as they're striving for justice are both great. And then knowing that a lot of the work that kind of advances social justice is inherently super difficult, and really best achieved through partnership with other people is really important.
And Aida, if we turn to you for this question as well, what do you think makes someone an effective collaborator and a responsible global citizen?
I would definitely echo what everyone else says, Gray. Those were incredible answers. I would also add to just further the point that to understand that we are embedded in the systemic structures wherever we're stepping into. So it's important to understand why we want to become a global citizen in the first place and what that really entails. So for me, it's personally someone who's understanding and responsive to the current systematic crisis and ethically responsible to the ongoing conditions are at the root of these crises, and someone who goes beyond the transmission of static competencies or content and instead takes part in ongoing self-reflexivity and accountability and discernment. And towards this end, it's really important to balance concrete policy, open-ended pedagogy, critical affective literacy with this intellectual and relational rigor that we've spoken about as well.
Well put by all of you. Thank you very much. The last, what I anticipate being the last round of questions before the open Q&A from the audience has to do with recommendations that you would offer those who are perhaps making their first trip abroad. If we start with Katherine, what advice would you offer current students who are eager to make the most of their experience, but are perhaps nervous about being abroad, be it for study, leisure, or service?
That's a great question and very appropriate for undergraduate audience. As I said before, I grew up in suburban New Jersey in a homogenous town, very sheltered, limited in my experiences, especially international, global diversity. I just didn't have that. And it was wonderful upbringing. I don't mean to knock it. It was just sheltered. So I've really gone the opposite now after college to gather a lot of information and experiences. So I was terrorized about going abroad. I hadn't even spent a lot of time in New York City by myself. So don't be ashamed of that if you feel that way about your own track, but also be willing to try new things. Don't let fear bother you. Don't let it get to you and consume you. The foreign experiences can be intimidating with cultural, language, and geopolitical differences. You can't let the fear hinder your path, and starting anywhere, somewhere, anywhere is an easy on-ramp. With an easy on-ramp is a really great way to start your journey. So, every experience builds upon the next. And I started off by, I was nervous about attending what college. So how do you make your choice? And I ended up making a more conservative choice by doing Villanova, where my father went, and 2 hours away from home, instead of going somewhere farther and different. But I also then wanted to go abroad. So I was nervous about where to go. And I looked at fashion programs in Paris and Milan, but I didn't speak the language, and I did speak Spanish. So I thought I'd go a little deeper, which gave me a little bit of a more of an expertise. And then since that time, over 20 years ago, when I overcame my feelings of uncertainty by having positive experiences with the first steps, I began to do more. And now I've been all around the world doing business studies and pleasure travel in places from Europe, India, Asia, Middle East. And now I'm even learning Arabic towards a Fulbright specialist program in the Middle East next year. So you have to start somewhere, and don't be intimidated.
Thank you, Katherine. Aida, what advice would you offer?
Sure. So I would again echo, lean into that discomfort. It's okay for it to be there, and it's good that it's there, because it's important to again have that self-reflexivity and to sit with it and to let yourself feel it and to question why you're feeling it, and where that discomfort is coming from is very important. Allow yourself time to sit with it. And allow yourself to reflect on what your presence carries in the spaces that you're entering. And another advice would be just to expect the hurdles. Don't expect for it to be smooth, and let that also be okay. But to kind of lessen that shock with hurdles, we can always use our resources to do research. We can reach out to our Villanova network. We can reach out to the resources at Villanova or otherwise, and learn about the context that we're entering. So we shouldn't expect people to really educate us once we enter, but rather educate ourselves as well and take on that responsibility ourselves. Of course, when we enter countries, learning from people and being open to that is of utmost importance, but having the background is also possible, and we can work with our networks and work with our resources to build that foundation for ourselves as well.
Wonderful. And I believe we probably have time for 1 minute for Patrick. What advice would you offer those who are eager to make the most of their time abroad?
Yeah, I just reiterate what everyone else said. I think doing whatever you can to familiarize yourself with the local context that you're entering prior to traveling is critically important. For me, that looked like downloading a Peace Corps language manual from 10 years ago, because it was the only resource I could find to teach myself Sesotho before I went to Lesotho was really important. And then reading a whole bunch about local politics before I arrived. Just so I could have some sense of what I was walking into, acknowledging also that you'll never fully understand everything about the environment that you're entering, but that you can do a lot to put yourself in an advantage to understand that environment and make the most of your time learning on the ground. If you're kind of intentional about walking in with some knowledge. And then I think I'd reiterate the point about being open and reflexive and creating time to intentionally reflect on just who you are and what you bring into a particular space and how you might be perceived in a space, and rely on your network to help make sense of those feelings. I also would just say, like, I found it really helpful living abroad to keep a journal, so that I could reflect back on the ways in which my perspectives had shifted and grown over time. And I would recommend that to anyone. And then I guess as a final point, just leaning on your network, feeling very free to reach out to folks at Villanova or elsewhere to learn about their experience and what you can take from it into your own.
Thank you. Sound pieces of advice from all three of our panelists. I do have one final question because I haven't seen other audience questions pop up, which has to do with the question of networking in an international space. Each of you is embedded in multiple professional networks around the world. How do you tend to approach networking? Why don't we start with you, Katherine?
Sure. Thank you, Gray. It's a great question. I don't really have a set strategy for that. I think what my fellow panelists have said about preparing and learning the most that you can about the environment before you step in, and continuing to be open to learn and reflecting on what you're doing and how things are going will help you. I right now, like I said, I'm learning Arabic towards a Fulbright specialist program in the Middle East next year, inshallah, God willing, with everything that's going on. So I think, I'm trying to learn as much as I can so that I'm prepared. And I've learned a lot of things to do, not to do. I've spearheaded partnerships by just being online and Googling social entrepreneur chocolate business. And I found a social entrepreneur who was doing exactly what I needed to do for my partnership. So, don't be afraid to reach out and go get what you want and what you need to do what you want to do. So you just don't want to be too shy. You want to be respectful and understand the culture, but you also are responsible for taking action to accomplish your goals.
Great, thank you. If we bounce back to you, Patrick, what is your approach to networking like, especially in an international and collaborative space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies depending on the nature of the project or what I'm kind of reaching out to someone for. But in general, I would say that I can give an example of my Fulbright and how I kind of developed that application. It was really important to me in thinking about what kinds of learning experiences I wanted to have through that experience, that I contribute to work that would exist and live on the ground, and not be something that was kind of just a learning experience for me. Like, I wanted to have a good learning experience. I wanted to be to foster this bi-directional cultural exchange that Fulbright really emphasizes. But I also wanted my work to have some degree of impact, and to not be the sole judge of what that impact should look like. And for me, as I was kind of thinking about like how to go about doing that, it looked like a lot of cold calling and cold emailing organizations saying, here is who I am. Like, here are some of the skills and experiences that I have currently. Here are some of the learning, like the things I want to learn through this potential experience. I wonder if we could set up a time to talk further about, basically whether it could be useful to you. And I had plenty of people who didn't respond to my email. And that was totally fine. You just take that in stride and accept that you're not always going to be useful to everyone everywhere. And that's okay. But I had a lot of positive responses to that when I think I was kind of open and honest about what I was looking for out of a potential partnership. And the ways in which I thought I could potentially advance a shared mission, and had kind of done some homework to ensure that that was the case beforehand. I think I've had a lot of success with that approach, generally speaking, and that's kind of what I carry into the spaces where I work now too. I do a lot of work with community-based organizations in Philadelphia, and kind of adopt a similar approach of saying, here's who I am, here's my background, I'm interested in this your work that you're doing, and want to do what I can to support it, and or learn more about it, depending on kind of the nature of what I'm reaching out for. And I wonder if we could reach out to set up a time to talk about that. And people are generally really, really supportive, as I think, as long as you're reaching out to the right people and have the knowledge that not everyone is going to respond to you all the time.
Aida, how do you tend to approach networking?
Sure. So I think my colleagues have really covered the cold calling and cold emailing, which I also stand by. But I think once you're in the country, looking at networking as relationship building, so something less of a transactional experience, but rather a moment, a time to make a connection and to learn from someone. And in that way, don't be afraid to use the network that you already have. So this doesn't mean that you always have to seek more networks, but the quality of the people that you are building those connections with is also really important. And we all have really vast and wonderful networks surrounding us, whether we know it or not. So don't be afraid to tap into those in the countries that you're in as well. It could be as simple as someone who is a friend who has connections to someone else. And we know in this globalized world now, those connections are getting smaller. The world is getting smaller and smaller, right? So don't be afraid to use that, to use alumni events, to use special interest groups, friends, family, and to make sure that you always keep in mind that this is a moment of a real connection with another human being.
Wow, this has been fabulous. Aida, Katherine, Patrick, Gray, thank you so much for your time today. All I keep thinking to myself is this is just an absolute treasure of information that we heard from each of you. How amazing to have Villanova alums walking the global earth in each of your areas of travel, your professional pursuits, and being able to share that with all of us today. I love that we've had the live audience. This is now a recorded session that will live on our Nova Network website platform for other alums to reference, as well as our undergrad and graduate students as they think about the power of global and international collaborations and really what that can mean for all of them in their own career trajectories. So thank you very, very much for your insights today, your tips. There could just be one piece of information that you shared today to a fellow Villanovan that really makes all the difference in their career, their personal as well as professional lives. So thank you. And Gray, thank you so much for moderating such a beautiful panel for us today. So to all of you in our audience, that is the end of our program for today. Thank you so much for being with us. And, hope you join us for more programming through the month of Nova Network November. We still have multiple programs happening, so definitely check out our registration site. But thank you for being here today. Again, thank you, Gray, Aida, Katherine, and Patrick. Really great to have you all here today. So that ends our presentation. Thank you for being with us, and go Cats. Peace up. Have a great day. Bye-bye.